Good evening and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Sardana. I am one of the co-founders of e-GMAT and I'm going to be a main host today. Supporting me in this webinar, we have Komal Shah, who's a GMAT strategy expert. She's also an ex-Be the GMAT moderator, and she's going to make sure that every question that you have is answered during this webinar. This is a fairly application-focused webinar. So in this webinar, we look at an approach to pre-thinking assumptions, and this is an approach that works for every assumption question. Then tomorrow, for those of you who are our GMAT Live Prep students, we actually take the same approach and apply this to evaluate. And then next week, we apply this to strengthen, weaken, and extend it to boldface questions following that. So the goal really is that over the next 10 days or so, we're going to cover the entire critical reasoning part of the GMAT. To make sure that you have the right foundation to be able to absorb the information in this webinar, we did send a few video lessons your way. One was the introduction to assumption, the second was the logical gap, and the third was the two entities. If you've not gone through these video lessons, they are a part of your free trial, so do go through them post this webinar. We also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free webinar on how to use algebra, very similar to today's webinar, fairly application focused. In this webinar, we just look at some very basic concepts and apply them to the most challenging problems that the test can throw at you. And we focus on absolute value, we focus on inequalities, and so on and so forth. And then next week, the webinar for those of you who are looking for a score of 720 or higher, we have a GMAT strategy webinar, and we look at if you're looking for that score of 720, 740, 760, how should you think about your GMAT strategy depending on where you currently are, and then how should you build a trackable plan, and what are the areas that you should focus on while executing that plan. So that's next Saturday. This is a free webinar. I have about 125 students in this webinar, and to make sure that we get to know you guys well enough, we ask a few leading questions, or rather, we ask many questions. And in the beginning, we ask a few leading questions that gives us an idea of this group as a whole. One of the first ones is, when do you plan to take the test? And based on the data that I have over here so far, what I really see is that we have really two large segments, those who have between 45 to 75 days and those who have between a month and 45 days before their test. And then we have two equally sized segments, those who have within a couple of weeks and those who haven't taken their data as of yet. And then we basically have a few folks who have their exam right away. And when it comes to the target GMAT scores, I have about 82 responses so far. Let's get to about 100 responses or so. I see the 730 to 750 brackets most popular, and the two adjoining brackets, the 710, 720, and 760 or higher, similarly popular overall. And about 12% of this group is aiming for a score of 600 to 700. Okay, with that, let's go right into the presentation pane. The screen will be in the process of changing for you. I'm going to give you guys another 15 to 20 seconds so the screen does settle down for you guys. Okay, now most of you at this point in time should be seeing the first slide, which says CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions. Select yes if you see that, select no otherwise. All right, it seems pretty much everyone can see that. That's wonderful. For a couple of folks who can't, just join again. And then if that happens, I apologize that this has happened for you. But if you're on a slightly slower connection, if you're connecting using your cell phone's internet connection, then that could happen. All right. With that, there's essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to e-GMAT. In the second part, we're going to get into the core of this webinar, and we're going to do pre-thinking. And in the third part, if you have any questions that have not been answered in the first or second part, or if you have questions that do not pertain to the assumptions portion of critical reasoning, but they're more around the other aspects of critical reasoning or other aspects of verbal or quant, usually reserve those questions towards this last part of the webinar over here. So earlier on, I asked this question, which was, "What's your target GMAT score?" And about 65% of you said your target GMAT score is 730 or higher. So while 65% of you were aiming for that score, realistically, only 6% of the people get to that score of 720 or higher. And this is despite the fact that when you look at the median scores at top business schools, those scores continue to actually go up and up, and they've been going up for the last few years or so. So what is it people who actually get to these scores do? A good percentage of them, they basically use e-GMAT. Why do I say that? Um, when you look at the key stats on some of the leading forums, one is the number of verified reviews, and the second is the number of success stories posted in the last 12 months. What you're going to find is that uh, more students have posted reviews for e-GMAT than have posted for other major prep companies, and more success stories mention e-GMAT than do mention other prep companies. In fact, if you look at April on GMAT Club, what you're going to find is about 70% of all success stories that were posted in April were mention e-GMAT as the reason for the success. So, what makes our students more successful, or rather, what causes the success? If there's one thing which differs us from other prep companies, it is our approach to GMAT preparation, which is the architecture of learning that we provide. And to understand this difference, let's understand the two dominant architectures of learning that exist today. The first architecture that exists today is what we call as a book-based approach, and the second one is a private tutoring-based approach. When you look at a lot of the online courses available today, even though they provide audiovisual instruction, even though they provide quizzes and all those things, their dominant architecture is still based on that book-based approach. e-GMAT, on the other hand, is when you map our learning architecture to these two architectures, what you're going to find is that e-GMAT is much more closely aligned with that private tutoring-based architecture. So let's see how one architecture is different than the other, and why does a private tutoring based architecture lead to higher score improvements. So to do that, let's kind of take a case study of someone who wants to go for a score of 720, and we'll take it as a start as someone who's starting at a score of 600. I think it probably boils down to what the majority of you would be in the situation that majority of you are in, which is starting at a 580 to 620 and then aiming for a score of 720 or higher. So how do you get there? The first thing you need to do to be able to achieve this in an efficient fashion is to create a path to your goal. Then, and when you create that path, you need to identify which are the areas that you need to focus on, how much time are you going to spend over there, so on and so forth. Then you need to learn all the concepts that you need to learn. Then just learning the concepts isn't important, as many of you know. You also must know how to apply those concepts and solve the easy, medium, and hard problems that the test is going to throw at you. And you need to get so good at solving questions or applying these concepts that you attain a level of mastery that puts you in that top 6 percentile or the top 3 or top 2 percentile or so. Let's see how a book-based approach solves this problem. Now, a book-based approach is all about autonomy, which means that you get to make a lot of decisions when you follow that book-based approach. What it really means is that when you start studying using a book-based approach, you don't get any study plans. A book gives you a couple of study plans, and essentially you need to decide which one is more suitable than the other. If you need to, many of you end up creating I would say a mishmash of those study plans. Then you start learning based on those study plans and learn concepts. Now, there are a good number of books that will teach you concepts very well. The problem really is they don't validate whether you've learned the concept or not. And then that burden of validation is completely on you. One area where books don't do as great a job with regards to teaching you how to go about doing that is teaching you application of concepts. Just the very static nature of book is ill-suited to tell you, hey, when you approach a problem, this is how you approach it in step 1, this is how you approach it in step 2, and so on and so forth. And essentially, what it really means is that people who follow a book-based approach, they resort to solving hundreds and hundreds of questions, and some are able to master application, but only the best and brightest. And when it comes to evaluation of mastery, a lot of people who follow the book-based approach, uh, they essentially take a good number of mock tests. And again, when you take a mock test, that onus of evaluation is completely on you. Let's see how a private tutoring-based architecture solves this problem. When you work with a good private tutor, the first thing that a good private tutor would do is work with you to understand your strengths and weaknesses and create a personalized study plan. And when in that personalized study plan, you have proper allocation of time to your areas of weakness as well as to your areas of strength. Essentially, you want to make sure that that you spend enough time to make sure that you make the most out of your strength, and you spend enough time to overcome your weakness. Then a private tutor teaches you concepts. And then the good thing about working with a private tutor is that a private tutor would give you feedback as to how well you're learning those concepts. Same thing with application. When you're starting to solve problems, a private tutor would closely evaluate how you're approaching a problem, what steps are you following, and if you're faltering, on which step are you faltering, and will give you feedback accordingly. And then a private tutor, as you get better at application, would constantly evaluate your extent of mastery and would ask you to move from one topic to the other as when the private tutor deems suitable, as in when you've attained that level of mastery. So while you're learning the same content in both these approaches, the extent of personalization, the extent of feedback is a lot more in that private tutor based approach, and it's very easy to see why that's a lot more successful. So let's see why is it that we say that most of the other prep companies are around this book-based approach, whereas e-GMAT's built around this private tutoring-based architecture. We'll start with creating that path to that plan to your path to your goal. And again, as I said, we'll go from a 600 to a 720 score. So if you're an e-GMAT student, how do you go about doing that? If you're an e-GMAT student, the first thing that you do is create that personalized study plan based on the diagnostics. And you do that based on using a tool called GMAT Planner. That's an artificial intelligence driven utility that allows each one of you to create your personalized study plan in as few as 7 minutes. So let's see how this utility works. The first thing that you do is you actually tell the utility where you currently are, and you tell itself what your current and quant and verbal scores are. Now, what you really see is that over here, both the student is at 50 percentile in both quant and verbal, as you can see over here. But because this utility understands what these percentiles mean, it understands that a Q44 means a much higher relative ability in quant than a V28 tells you. A Q44 about 8 years ago was 70 odd percentile. Then it based on that, it first improves your quant score and then improves your verbal score. So it recommends a Q50 and a V38 to achieve 720. Now this is a really good recommendation. Let's say you take it. So in that case, it tells you how would you get to a Q50 and how do you get to a V38. There are many ways to get to a Q50, and based on the target, the starting scores of this student, the plan suggests balancing out both arithmetic and algebra. And based on the starting scores, the plan suggests that the student excels in sentence correction and critical reasoning and does really well in reading comprehension as well. So when that happens, your journey from that 600 to that 720 score is not a black box on which you're really studying, okay, I'm going to study quant today, I'm going to study verbal 3 days from now, and so on and so forth. It's a set of 5 neatly defined milestones. So where you have your starting abilities in quant and your ending abilities in quant. If you hit those milestones, you can be very certain that you'd hit that 720 score. Not only that, then this utility also creates a study sequence with an approximate amount of time that you need to spend on various steps in that sequence. Here's that sequence. You can really see on the left you have your starting abilities, on the right you have your target milestones, and then you also see how much time per subsection is needed. So for example, in arithmetic you need to spend about 1.4 weeks to go from 59 percentile to 83rd percentile. Similarly, in sentence correction you need about 2.1 weeks to go from the 50th to the 90th percentile, and so on and so forth. It then gives you a calendar level view of all of this. So again, your personalized study plan now becomes achieving these milestones. I said it then gives you a calendar view, and again remember it takes into account how much time you can spend study per day. It also gives you a starting date, it also calculates an ending date, and if for any reason there are certain days on which you can't study, you can always click on those days and adjust the amount of time that you can put in those days. On the contrary, if there are certain days when you plan to take a vacation, you can also increase the amount of time on those days. So this utility does all of that for you. So why did we spend about 1,000 hours building this utility? This utility has 3 neural networks. We've actually tested this for about 1,000+ cases, and so on and so forth. The reason we spend 1,000 hours doing this is that so that each one of you can create your study plan in 7 minutes or fewer. And right now, we launched this utility in towards the end of February, and upwards of 4,000 study plans have been created using this utility. Now, that's about study plans. The next thing that a private tutor does is that he teaches you concepts and gives you feedback as you're learning those concepts. The e-GMAT learning architecture is designed to do that. What you see over here is our subject verb module, and essentially when we teach you concepts, we give you feedback on how well you're learning those concepts. Here you see on the left 2.1 to 2.4 are 4 concepts in subject verb. Each of these concepts is a video lesson, and it's interactive video, and each video lesson has its own embedded quiz. You spend about 15 to 20 minutes learning the concept, and you get feedback, and you get evaluated right then and there, and you get feedback on how well you've learned. Compare this to another popular course by Magoosh, and what you really see is that same topic, subject verb over here. What you see is that this essentially leads like a book in an audiovisual format. There's very little feedback. This time that you see over here is the length of the video, not the amount of time you spent on this particular video. Then what a private tutor does is after teaching you concepts, a private tutor would teach you how to apply those concepts. And to do that, we build this entity called an application file, and it tells you what you need to do in step 1, step 2, and step 3. Then we also evaluate your ability to apply those concepts in a practice quiz as well as an official guide quiz. And again, it works very much like a private tutor would do. We teach you how to apply the concepts, we evaluate you, and then we evaluate you to that next level as well and give you feedback in each one of these. Now, these scores typically are, the score in this example is very low because this is on my account where it was randomly done, but most people get about 80% or higher over here. And again, when you learn the concepts very well, there's no reason why you would not learn the application well enough. And this is how every quant and every verbal module is architected. And again, let's compare the same thing over here. And what you really see is the few things. First of all, there's no application file. Second, subject verb is only covered in these 3 files overall. There is one quiz, but that quiz is purely for practice. You don't see any scores, you don't see any timing tracked overall. Again, the intent is not to give you feedback, but just to give you practice. And the last step is making sure that you do things well enough that you are among those top 6 percentile of students. And the reason why this is important is because you're studying sentence correction to hit that 90th percentile overall. To help you evaluate your extent of mastery, to help you get those ability or those target milestones, we have this entity called Scholarium, in which we have ability quizzes. In these ability quizzes, you can take an ability quiz and we'll tell you what your ability score is. So in about 30 minutes, you'll get an ability score, and then we'll also tell you where you need to focus on. So in this case, this student clearly needs to improve his ability in comparisons. And the beauty of this is the student can go back to a comparisons module and essentially revise that module, come back to Scholarium and take another ability quiz, so on and so forth. So again, As I really said, you learn the same content in both these approaches, but the extent of application, the extent of feedback, the extent of precision in a private tutoring based approaches is a lot more. And you can really see how we've architected e-GMAT to follow this approach. Now, who's created this content? Some of GMAT Club's highest rated instructors have created this content. Instructors who've been at this for far longer than instructors from most other prep companies, and which is why it's no surprise that these instructors have more reviews per faculty than actually about 10 times more reviews now per faculty than reviews for instructors from any other prep company. So it's fairly easy to see why, even though only very few people get to that 720 or higher score, a good percentage of them use e-GMAT. As we said, we did start our batch today. This is our typical verbal batch calendar, and I'm going to share our GMAT Live Prep batch calendar overall. We start a batch every 2 weeks. So our batch starting today, the next batch after that would be on 25th of May, and then 2 weeks from then, so on and so forth overall. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention is with our GMAT Live Prep, we now offer an up to 120 point score improvement guarantee. That's the highest guarantee that you'd see anywhere. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay updated with all things that go on in the MBA world, if you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have upwards of 11,000 students connected with me on my LinkedIn. We do post about 5 to 6 articles per week on my LinkedIn as well. With that, we've come to the end of the first part of the webinar. Now we're going to go into the core of this webinar, which is how do you pre-think assumptions? So how do we go about doing this? We'll first understand how you approach assumption questions today. Then we'll do a pre-thinking exercise in which I'm going to give you 2 arguments. These are actually I'm going to give you 2 arguments. These are pure arguments, no answer choices. Our goal would be to apply the pre-thinking framework. One of these arguments is very simple. The other one a bit more GMAT-like. The idea is for you to be able to pre-think assumptions right then and there. Then we're going to solve 2 to 3 full-length questions. Each one of these full-length questions is an official question. And we're going to solve them as a quiz, which means you're going to solve them one after the other. Once you do that, we'll do a detailed review of these questions. And as we do that, we're going to apply pre-thinking, we're going to apply the negation test. And then we're going to discuss how can you improve on what you've learned today and become a skilled pre-thinker. And where can you get more content for practice. So at a very high level, we'll document how you prepare today. Then we'll look at what's important to master assumptions. And then we'll present your should-be approach or how can you improve on this going forward. So with that, let's understand how you approach assumption questions today. We put in a few poll questions. So before we do that, let's look at a definition of assumption. What is pre-thinking? Pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before you look at the answer choices. So the three elements in codes, they're very important. I'll start with the word before looking at the answer choices. You pre-think an assumption before you even look at any choice over there. Why? Because the moment you start looking at answer choices, you can throw pre-thinking out of the window. Why? Because the additional information provided in any answer choice will corrupt your mind. The second thing, we are only concerned about thinking or pre-thinking one potential assumption. Note, an argument can have multiple assumptions. We don't care about multiple assumptions. We only care about one potential assumption. And then the last piece, if you are a skilled pre-thinker, you'd be able to do this in 15 seconds. Another point that I want to clarify is that a lot of people think pre-thinking is same as pre-phrasing the answer. It's same as predicting the answer. No, it isn't. The intent is not to predict the answer. The intent is to make sure that you've comprehended or you comprehend the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion. That's really important distinction. Why? Because as a term, pre-thinking has been there in the blogosphere for a very long time, but it's often confused as predicting the answer or prephrasing the answer. Okay. Prior to us using this term, people confuse pre-thinking with predicting the answer. I want to make sure you understand that's not what we're trying to do. Sometimes it may happen that the assumption that you would have thought is there in the answer choices as is. Other times it may not be there. And it's okay one way or the other as long as you do a good pre-thinking. You'd be able to spot an assumption the moment you see it. Eugene says, what if you can't think of any assumption while trying to pre-think? Eugene, if you follow the right framework, you're going to be able to think of an assumption. If you, in the worst case, in the unlikely scenario that you're unable to think of an assumption, you'd be able to think of the logic that the assumption would follow. And then we'll show that with examples. It's just by definition, pre-thinking is a very predictable approach. The only time you won't be able to think of an assumption is if you didn't read the argument well enough or if you did not understand the conclusion, in which case you have a problem anyway. But if you understand the argument, if you understand the conclusion, if you understand the logic that the author is using, it's easy to think of an assumption. And that's what we're going to focus on in this webinar. Good question, really good question. So let's look at how people approach CR questions. And so the question over here is, which of the two methodologies do you follow while answering CR questions? And I'm going to put in this poll question over here so that you can choose either methodology 1 or methodology 2. All right, let's look at the data. So what I see over here is we have a 40-60 split. 40% of the students follow methodology 1, where you read the argument, you go to the answer choices, and then do back and forth till you reach the final candidate. 60% of the people follow the pre-thinking approach. That is good. Let's move forward. The next question is those who follow the pre-thinking approach, which is methodology 2, and for them the question really says, where do you spend the biggest chunk? It says majority, but it should technically say the biggest chunk of your time. And you see the 3 answer choices over here. All right, let's get some answers. Where do you spend the biggest chunk of your time when following the pre-thinking approach? Three, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Broadcast the results. 75% of you say that it's in reading and understanding the argument. That's where it should be. That's really good. For those of you who are selecting the correct answer, you either are solving uber difficult questions or you're not following the approach more closely. But essentially, for those of you who do follow the pre-thinking approach, this is where select reading and understanding the argument is where you should be spending a majority of the time. Now, one of the things that's really important is when you're learning something new, whether it's assumptions, whether it's number properties, whether it's learning how to write a resume, you have to always focus on what's my primary problem and then what's my secondary problem. So I saw a poll question, a really good poll question. I mean, I like these questions. It tells me more about you as to how do you deal with arguments in which you may see difficult terms. So yes, it is a problem. There are some arguments in which you'd see difficult terms, but typically there are very few. So I mean, I'd say about 3 to 5% of the arguments in official GMAT questions would contain a difficult term. Now, most of the times those arguments would be towards the more challenging questions. If you are in this webinar, don't worry about these arguments for two reasons. One, you're probably not there at the 80th or 90th percentile level where you should start when you should start worrying about them, because if you were, you probably won't be in this webinar. The second thing is the amount of practice that you'd get in the e-GMAT platform, will make sure that you go through all those terms. You're able to understand those terms. So if you are in this webinar, put your focus on understanding, learning how to understand the argument. Okay. So with that, let's understand what an assumption is. And to do that, I'm going to give you a very, very simple argument. And then this argument is something that's really close to your heart. So I'm going to give you a very simple argument. I'm going to ask you to pre-think. Okay. Here's the argument. Tell me, what does the author assume in this case? All right, another 10 seconds. 3, 2, and 1. So here are your poll responses. Pretty much all of you got this. Got this right. So let's see what's happening over here. The author gives you a data point. It says there's a guy called Joe. He got a certain GMAT score, that is 500 on the GMAT. Based on this data point, what the author really concludes is, he says, therefore, it's a conclusion marker, Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. Okay, so it's a very specific kind of college called Ivy League college. So essentially what's there is you have a data point and then you have a jump between the conclusion where that data point is linked to an admission in an Ivy League college. So what does the author assume? As a lot of you have already said, 500 is not enough for Ivy League colleges, or to be more precise, the assumption really is a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. And the reason why this is important over here in assumption is because the author's conclusion is about Joe. The author says he will not get admission. The author doesn't say nobody with a score of 500 would get admission into an Ivy League college. So because the conclusion is about Joe, the assumption also has to consider Joe. Okay. So essentially there are two characteristics of an assumption. One, so what is an assumption? Can someone really tell me the real definition? And then we'll talk about the two characteristics of an assumption. All right, I have about 24 answers, 31 answers. 39, 40. $50. All right, another 5 seconds and then I'm gonna share the results. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, you can see what others have written. So guys, when I ask you to put in your answers, some of you uh, 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 are uh, are putting those answers in the Q&A pod. Please do not do that, because the Q&A pod is for your questions, and I see some really good questions also arriving in the Q&A pod. So as you can really say, a lot of you have put in the answers, and a lot of you have really focused on something called an unstated premise. Some of you really talked about an assumption that the must be true aspect of an assumption, and others have gone further ahead to link that must be true aspect should be linked to the conclusion. Okay. Really, the definition is includes all of this. What is an assumption? An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So there are two key aspects of it. First of all, because it's an unstated idea, an assumption must present new information that can't be inferred from the factual part of the argument. And the second thing is that it must be true for the conclusion to hold true, which means that without the assumption being true, the conclusion has a possibility of breaking down. Let's kind of look at this with a metaphor. Okay, let's take a metaphor of a house. Okay, let's assume your conclusion is this roof over here. Now you have these three pillars that are supporting this roof. This entire house is your argument, by the way. So you have these three pillars supporting this roof. Now, when you look at these three pillars, one of the things that you might conclude is that there's only one pillar which is an essential pillar when it comes to supporting this roof. Which means that if you remove that essential pillar, which is the pillar in blue, the roof will come down. The other two pillars, while they make the roof stronger, they're not required for the roof to stand in steady state. Okay, the roof might stand or may be able to stand without it. So when you think of an argument and you think of the conclusion as this roof, what we are looking for is this essential pillar without which must be there for the roof to stay upright. Without this essential pillar, your roof will go down. So what does must be true mean? And the reason why I'm going into this is because if you understand this must be true aspect of assumption, you'd be able to solve the most challenging questions. What does must be true means? It means that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true, or the conclusion becomes invalidated. Or in other words, the assumption must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. And let's apply this to the argument that we did. And the reason why we did the first argument is a very simple argument, is because you can see the application of it and you can see it in your day-to-day lives. So let's see what does falsification of conclusion mean. Again, we're going to look at the same argument, and let's see what does it mean when we say that this conclusion would be falsified or the conclusion would be destroyed. This conclusion is falsified when Joe gets admission into an Ivy League school with a score of 500. Can you guys see that? That if Joe gets admission into an Ivy League school with this 500 score, the conclusion is broken down or falsified. Right? It's very simple to really see. Okay, so this is what we call as the falsification condition of the conclusion, and we're going very step by step. And if you understand these steps, you're going to see that us applying these steps on the most complex arguments that we'll solve today. Okay, so let's see, how do we evaluate, given an answer choice, whether that answer choice is correct or not. Now we already know the correct answer choice, but let's go through the test so we can really see how does the system behave when you apply this test to the correct answer choice. Again, same argument. See the argument over here. We said this is our assumption. You guys came up with an assumption. It says a score of 500 for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Let's ask ourselves, is that must be true? Or in other words, will the conclusion become invalid if the statement to the left, which is this answer choice over here, no longer holds true? So let's see what happens when this answer choice no longer holds true. When you say, and listen to this carefully, when you say that a statement no longer holds true, by definition, the negated version of that statement becomes true. So when you say that a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable, if that no longer holds true, then what becomes true is that a score of 500 for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Or in other words, its negated instance automatically becomes true. Now what happens when this becomes true? Does the conclusion break down when a score of 500 becomes acceptable? Absolutely, it breaks down. Why? Because if a score of 500 is acceptable, then the author cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. This is the must be true aspect of the conclusion or of the assumption. And this essentially is nothing but applying the negation test. Okay. Now the key thing in this to understand really is that when you say that a statement is not true, it's why do we say that the negated instance automatically becomes true? Let's kind of see that with an example. If you really say that Harvard has the best MBA program, and if you say if that's not true, by definition what it really means is that there's an MBA program which is either better than Harvard or as good as Harvard. Think about it. When you say that statement, Harvard has the best MBA program, is not true, its negated version automatically becomes true. Can you see that in this example? Let's take another example. John runs faster than David. Okay. If you say that this statement isn't true, then it automatically means you can infer from this, and this is why we have the inference module before the assumption module. What really means is that either David is as fast as John or David is faster. There's someone named XYZ who's as fast or faster than John. Or in this case, we're comparing John and David. So when you say John runs faster than David is not true, then David is either as fast or faster than John. Can you see how when you say something isn't true, you can infer the other statement, which is the negated version of that? That's a very important thing that you need to understand. Okay. Again, remember, if an answer choices must be true, which means it's the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down by definition in the presence of the negated version. Why? Because if it's a correct assumption, then it must be true for the conclusion to hold true. And if it must be true, then its negated version will kill the conclusion. Another part of this which is there is if the answer choice is not the correct choice, which means if it's not must be true, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of negated instance, which means if you have an answer choice which is an incorrect answer choice and you're confused with it, you apply the negation test and what you're going to find is the conclusion will continue to stand strong in the presence of that negated version. Let's apply that. Same argument. Okay, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore he will not get admission into an Ivy League college. The answer choice that we are evaluating is a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Okay, let's look at this and say, is this a must be true argument or must be true answer choice for the argument? So again, the same question, will the conclusion become invalid if the statement to the left is no longer true? Which means a score of 500 becomes a good score, which means if we really say that a score of 500 is a good score, will the conclusion break down? The answer to that is no. Not really. Why? Because the author's conclusion is not based on whether a score of 500 is qualified as a good or bad score. Or in other words, you could have replaced 500 by 700 and the logic of the argument would still have remained the same. Okay. So that's by definition. And again, some of you may be confused. Really say this seems super complex. Bear with me. In 2 more arguments, you're going to really see how this helps you understand this. You're learning a new method. A new method always seems complex in the beginning. But essentially, must be true helps you arrive at the correct answer. For correct answer choice, if the answer choice that you're evaluating is the correct answer choice, the conclusion will break down in the presence of negated version of that answer choice. If the answer choice that you're evaluating is incorrect, the conclusion will not break down when you negate this answer choice. Okay, I have two great questions over here. Augustine says that does this technique work for assumption questions only, or does it also work for strengthen and weaken? This technique works, the pre-thinking works for strengthen, weaken, assumption, evaluate, boldface, and every. And in each GMAT, we teach you how to do that, and for every critical reasoning question type. We're studying pre-thinking for assumptions today. Tomorrow we're going to extend that to evaluate, which is and then next week we're going to extend this method to strengthen and weaken. So the same core method is modified to all of these question types. Good question, Augustine. The next question which is there is, how do you avoid real world understanding to not affect your answer selection? That's a good question. What happens as you practice this method is you focus on the precision of the information that's given to you, and you're going to really see this in the next three arguments that we do. And as you do that, you get into the habit of avoiding. Part of it is to solidify the process. The other part is practice, and with both, in about 10 to 12 arguments, you'd really get to it. Negation test, Sayed works on assumption questions. There's a modification of negation test that works on evaluate questions as well. Okay, so here's the process that we're going to follow. I'm going to now give you a critical reasoning argument in which you're going to apply your pre-thinking approach. Now, you don't have a solid approach right now, but I want you to take a stab at this argument. I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes to do that. Then I'm going to apply the pre-thinking approach that I want to teach you in this webinar. And to do that, we're going to just revise this for about 3 minutes, and then we're going to apply that approach. The moment we apply that approach, what you're going to really see is that assumptions would start jumping out at you. And then we'll evaluate a couple of submissions. Okay. So these are the 3 steps that we will follow. So with that, I'm going to give you a short answer pod. Let me actually hide this poll over here. Here's your short answer pod in which you can put in your pre-thinking. What are some of the core skills required for pre-thinking? First of all, you need to be able to understand how to read an argument. Then you need to be able to identify the conclusion and understand every word. One recommendation that I would have is read the conclusion very slowly. Understand each and every word. Then understand what the conclusion is trying to say and what's the logic that the author is trying to use. And if you understand all of the above and what an assumption is, then you should be able to pre-think the answer. Why do people take longer? Why do people falter? They read really fast. Okay. And when they read really fast, they don't comprehend on what they're reading. They worry too much about timing. I see a question which is there, which is saying, what is the recommended amount of time to devote to CR questions? I can tell you the answer is between 2 minutes and 2 minutes 30, but at this stage, you shouldn't worry about it. You're learning a new thing. Don't bother about timing at this stage. I'll tell you when to bother about timing. Okay. Focus on asking the right questions. Okay. As long as you focus on doing things right, as long as you don't worry about the clock when you're learning, if you have the right foundation, have this proper approach, you can go from a 30th percentile to a 90th percentile in 5 days. 5 days, that's it. But if you do not have a solid foundation, you can spend months on solving critical reasoning. You won't hit to that 90th percentile. Okay. With that, we're going to take our first proper argument, not the example argument, not like the example argument that we did. It was a very simple one, but our first proper argument. And here is the argument. Now remember, get a pen and paper. ready. All right, guys, I'm going to give you another 40 seconds or so. I have 17 answers so far. I want to get 50 answers. All right. So 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. So I'm going to give you about 30 to 40 seconds to read everyone's answer. There's some really good answers here, which is, I'm really happy to see that. Let's say about out of the 57 odd answers that we have, which by the way is really good participation for a short answer poll kind of response. What I really see is that about 10 to 12 very good answers. The other ones not so great. You haven't understood the intent of what we are trying to do over here. But 10 to 12 really, really good answers. So I'm really, really happy about that. So how do we approach this? The way we go about approaching this is we really look at what the conclusion is. We then look at what's the logic that the author uses to arrive at that conclusion. Okay. And then we ask a pre-thinking question that allows us to arrive at assumptions. And what is that pre-thinking question? The pre-thinking question is, under what conditions, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? And why do we ask this question? So if you think about the theory that we did, an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. If you remember the house analogy, we said the conclusion is this roof and the assumption is that pillar which must be there for the roof to stay upright. Okay. So what it essentially means is that without the assumption, the conclusion will break down. Or in other words, the assumption or assumptions, if there are multiple assumptions, they're built around scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. So to figure out where to put an assumption, let's find the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. If you find those scenarios, the assumption really is simply that those scenarios do not exist. So what do we do to find those scenarios? We ask this very simple question. Under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? Here's our question, the same question that we did. I've divided this into 3 statements. So the first thing we have to figure out is which statement is my conclusion. So I have 4 statements here because I use this poll question for multiple arguments, but only consider statement 1, 2, and 3 as possible answers and tell me which statement do you think is the main conclusion of the argument. Don't choose statement 4, only statements 1, 2, or 3. Which statement do you think is the author trying to make you believe as the main conclusion? Okay, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. 55% of you or 54% of you think statement 2 is the main conclusion, and you guys are absolutely correct. That is the main conclusion. A number of people also think that statement 1 is the main conclusion, and those people who think statement 1 is the main conclusion, they often focus on this word concludes, and they really say because the word concludes is there, that must be the main conclusion. No, remember, the main conclusion in an argument is always by the author. Over here, this conclusion is by a published paper. It's not by the author. Okay. Statement number 1 over here is a fact. Okay. Statement 2, which is clearly the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers, has to do with the reward system for the former. That is your main conclusion. Why? Because this is what the author is trying to believe. Statement number 3 is written to make statement number 2 more believable. When you say the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty typically places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching, the reason why the author provides that statement is because he wants to make you believe statement number 2, which is that the difference between professors in tenure system and the full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. And statement number 1 is a data point on which the entire argument is based. Now, I want you to take a step back. and understand what's happening in this argument. In this argument, the author is not disagreeing, or the author actually completely agrees with this data point that is given. What the author is trying to do when he's trying to make his conclusion is he's trying to figure out why this happens. Okay, and to define why this happens, the author is concluding that the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers, so these two entities, has to do with the reward system for the former. Who is the former? The former is professors. So it says because of the reward system for the professors, there is that difference in learning outcomes. And then he then goes on to really say that the reward system for professors, tenured faculty is the same as professors, typically places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Okay. So tell me one thing. What do you understand by the last statement over here, statement number 3? What do you infer from statement number 3 in this argument? Or let me ask this other question. Whose reward statement system does statement number 3 discuss? Is it tenured faculty? Is it lecturers? Or is it both? Is it tenured faculty? Is it lecturers? Or is it both? Okay, let's get to a 3, 2, and 1. I'd like to get a few more responses, guys. Here are the results. So what you really see is 84% of you say tenured faculty, 13% of you say both, and then very few say lecturers. So for those of you who say both, you guys are wrong, because if you read the statement again, statement says that the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. So essentially, we are comparing the emphasis on research, this word greater, which is a comparative word over here, that compares the emphasis on research versus teaching purely for tenured faculty. We have no idea about the reward system for lecturers. Can you guys see that? In statement number 3, there is nothing which says that this has to be about lecturers. It says it's just about tenured faculty. The criterion for rewarding tenured faculty. Okay. And the word greater is comparing the emphasis on research than on teaching. Can you guys see that? Yes, no, can you write that in the short answer part, please? All right, perfect. So let's move forward. So what's our pre-thinking question? The pre-thinking question very simply is, under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Which means, under what circumstances will the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance between tenured faculty and lecturers, given that full-time lecturers enhance student learning more than professors do, that's given to us, and the reward system for the professors places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Now remember, what we are trying to figure out is a way in which we would not blame the reward system. Okay, that's all that the author cares about. Okay. Here's a pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances will the reward system not cause a difference between tenured and non-tenured, given that reward system for professors places greater emphasis on research? What are some of the possible scenarios? If we can really say that if non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, okay, if that is the case, then we can't blame the reward system for the difference in performance. Do you agree? If non-tenured has an identical reward system, you can't blame the reward system. It has to be something else. Or if most tenured professors do not act as per the reward system. You know, you can have a reward system, But you don't, if tenured faculty does not care about that reward system could have been anything else, that behavior would not have changed. Even in that case, you can't blame the reward system. Do you guys agree? In either cases, the conclusion breaks down. So what is our assumption? One is non-tenured, that none of these scenarios is true, which means non-tenured professors do not have an identical reward system. Their reward system has to be different. Okay. And then most tenured professors should care about the reward system. Their behavior should be dependent on the reward system. These are your assumptions. Now, some of you would also say, what if we really figure out that something else is responsible for the difference in behavior? Yes, that would be a correct assumption as well, but that would be very easy for an official question. Okay. Can you really see, once you ask these pre-thinking questions and once you figure out that falsification scenario, how assumptions jump out at you? And if you frame your pre-thinking question correctly, you would see assumptions start to become very important. And which is what I want you to learn. So in the remainder of this session, we're about an hour into this session already. We have about another hour. In the remainder of this session, we're going to do 3 more arguments and 3 official arguments. I want you to put in this goal where you're framing the falsification question clearly. As long as you frame the falsification question clearly, you're fine. You'd be able to do that. Okay, so that's something which is really important. So there was a question which said, which asked me another piece over it, which asked me, and the question really said, is this a correct answer as what someone asked me? Let me just put in a notes pod over here. Then let me just do that. I'm going to put in the answer choice. The assumption really said is tenured faculty let me just increase the font size over here. Tenured faculty are more interested in the reward system than full-time lecturers, and the person asked this question, is that an assumption? And my answer to that is, and this is something which was there in the Q&A pod, it got deleted, so I'm going to really put this over here. Is it for the conclusion to hold true? Is it required? And this is the classic case in which, if the author wants to, if the test taker wants to confuse you, they're going to do this. Is it required that is that required? Can you guys tell me? That the level of interest in the reward system for tenured faculty be higher than that of full-time lecturers? No, it is not required. As long as they are interested, they're going to behave as per it. So that is why this statement is not a correct assumption. Why? Because it's not must be true, and that's the must be true nature of the assumption. What must be true is that the tenured faculty be interested. Okay, and that's the beauty of this. Once you understand that logic of the argument, once you understand those must be true conditions, you'd be able to weed out these problems, because this is an answer choice which makes this question a 700 level question. If you see this answer choice, I will tell you, people who don't have this framework, 8 out of 10 will mark this as correct. But if you have this framework, you're going to ask this, is that required? If that's not the case, does it falsify my conclusion? And the answer to that is no. Why? Because we don't care about this term more interested. The more word, the comparative term over here is not important. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And you're going to, if something isn't clear, the next question will make it very clear. But for those of you who want more insights into the negation test, if you're not an e-GMAT student, take a look at this article. It's probably the most comprehensive coverage outside of the e-GMAT course that you're going to find on negation test. Okay. Now, with regards to pre-thinking and timing, some of you may be feeling, okay, I like this process. It makes me things logical, but it seems it'll take too long. How the hell will I apply this in the test? So here's your journey as to how it would go. Let's say you're someone who's starting, whose accuracy is low. So you see on the y-axis you have accuracy, and you have 3 classifications: low, medium, and high. And the time to answer questions is medium. The moment you start applying this method, 2 things will happen. Your accuracy will increase, and your time to answer questions will go up. So you see, as you go from 1 to 2, you're going in this direction. And you're going to ask yourself, so why the hell am I applying this approach? I already worry about timing a whole lot, and this is increasing my time to answer question. And I will tell you, 9 out of 10 people would not look at the high accuracy as a positive thing. They would first question this. At that point in time, all I ask for you is to trust this approach. You're learning a new process. It takes slightly longer, or rather, it could take a lot longer to answer questions when you're learning a new approach. As you continue to do this, again, 2 things will happen. Your accuracy will continue to improve. Your time to answer questions will go down drastically. And the reason why this would happen is because you get more adept at 2 things. One is understanding how to read an argument, and second is framing your falsification question. As you get adept at both these things, you reach point number 3, where your accuracy improves, your time to answer question actually reduces a whole lot. And at that point, you will say, now I understand why this is so important. And then as you continue to do that, you're going to really continue to reap the benefits. And where, some of you asked, what's the average amount of time that I should take while answering CR questions? One needs to reach stage number 4. For medium questions, you'll take 1.5 minutes. For hard questions, you'll take 2 minutes. Your average will go down to about 1:45 minutes. Now, this is the first day of critical reasoning, but some of you have a foundation. Some of you are e-GMATers. I want to understand, which level do you think you are in right now? And just for e-GMATers, is it level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4? Which level do you think you are right now? For those of you who've already experienced a time reduction with an improvement in accuracy, you are in level 3. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Broadcast the results. So what we really see is we have 10 days of critical reasoning. On the first day itself, a good chunk of you are in level 3, which is really encouraging. A really good number of you are in level 2. And for those of you who are in level 1, you haven't started pre-thinking. So let's see how we can get more of you who are in level 2 to level 3. If you're in level 3, you're already in a positive feedback loop. Just continue what you're doing and you'll get to level 4 automatically. All right. With that, let's solve one other question using this approach, or rather we have 3 other arguments using this approach. we're going to solve one. But really, let's see what people have really said. What we're thinking. Here's a quote. It says, understand the passage completely. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think and answer before looking at the answer choice. Probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. Here's another one. It says this pre-thinking primes the mind and we are constantly on our toes while reading an RC passage or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we keep speculating in which direction the passage will orient or what logical dump has the author taken. Not just in critical reasoning, but also in reading comprehension. This pre-thinking actually will help you get to that 90th percentile or so. So it's a skill that you're building that's going to help you not just with one aspect of the GMAT, but with multiple aspects, and in fact, even beyond that with life. Okay, with that, we're going to do the second example. It's called highway miles. Here's the list of correct answer choices. And I'm going to give you 3.5 minutes to answer this question. So take it very slowly. This is a very simple argument, but apply the process as you evaluate the answer choices. The answer choices do get tricky. If you apply the process, if you build the falsification question, you'd be able to narrow down and select the correct answer choice. Hey guys, last 15 seconds. Get those responses in, please. Three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. So what you really see over here is two answer choices are very popular, which is choices B and E. E is the most popular choice. E is the correct answer. And that's about 43% of you have answered that. So that makes it actually a 700 level question. Let's see how to go about doing this. And then again, we're going to focus on how, when you pre-think the answer, you're able to narrow it down to the correct answer choice. So let's move forward. Very simple argument. What's going on in the first statement? What you're really talking about is a certain toll that's talked about. So say, in order to finance repairs, the Highway Commission is considering a 50% increase in the 10 cents per mile toll for its toll highway. So basically they want to increase that toll from 10 cents per mile to 15 cents per mile. And the Highway Commissioner claims that this toll increase will increase the annual revenue generated by at least 50% per year. Okay, so you have a data point and then you have a claim based on this. And again, very similar to our first argument where you said Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore he will not get admission into an Ivy League college. The first statement had a data point, the second statement had a claim. Okay, so let's see how we go about doing this. So here's your argument again, and the conclusion is that the annual revenue generated will increase by at least 50%. Then my question really is, how do you estimate the annual revenue? How do you estimate the annual revenue overall? Let me put in a short answer pod. How do you estimate annual revenue? You really say annual revenue is nothing but the amount of price per mile into total miles. That's basically it. Total distance into price per miles. Now, what do we already know? What do we already know? We already know that the toll per mile is already up by 50%. We already know that. Okay. We already know that toll per mile is up by 50%. That's something that's given to us. Okay. So then let's ask the question. Under what scenario will the annual revenue not increase by 50%, given that the toll per mile is up by 50%? The only scenario is the total number of miles go down. Okay, so what is your assumption? The total number of miles driven does not decrease. Is that clear? That's as simple as it gets, essentially, when you look at the argument. Perfect. Now, let's look at the answer choices. The only answer choice that talks about total number of miles is choice E, where we talk about the total distance traveled by vehicles over the toll highway will not decrease from its current level. That's the only choice thing. Let's look at choice B. Choice B is really popular. Okay, choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its current level. Now, let's look at, is that must be true, or in other words, does this mean that the total number of miles traveled on toll roads will decrease? The answer to that is not really. Why? Because the total number of miles may still remain the same despite fewer trips if the number of miles per trip increases. If you have 50 trips instead of 100 trips last year, but if each trip is twice as many miles, the total number of miles can still remain the same. So while this statement over here is a strengthener. It is not an assumption. Who says the trip size remains the same? Sunny, it's actually given to you that the toll is per mile, which means it kind of is indicating the reason why you have a toll per mile is because different trips have different number of miles. Okay, choices C and D. Let's explain those. Choices C says the average length of the trip made on the toll highway will not decrease. Okay, all right. What happens if the average length of trip decreases? You can have more trips. Essentially, in other words, let me just put in my notes pod. Let's see. Here is my notes pod over here. What is total number of miles is equal to let me just make it larger so that it's easy for you to see. The total number of miles is average length of trip multiplied by total number of trips. So because you have two entities, if total number of trips decreases, then the average length of trips can compensate for it. You can't really say for certain the total number of miles will go down. If the average length of the trip decreases, then the total number of trips can increase to compensate for it. Okay. Because the total number of miles is dependent on two variables, you can't really say for sure that if one decreases, the total number of miles will decrease for certain. Okay, Rupen, does that help with C? Okay, why not D? The number of drivers who constantly avoid tolls by using secondary tolls will not increase from its current level. What if that increases? So what? Then in that case, the average length of the trip on toll highway could increase. Okay, because if the numbers constantly avoid, what you're really saying is that maybe the total number of trips go down. Okay. I also want to make sure that you understand one piece over here. There's another question. It says if E were not a part of the answer choices, we would pick B as the best of the worst. Is that correct? Absolutely not. What you're really saying is, and this is a classic case in which you've seen questions which are not very well created. In critical reasoning, and in fact in any aspect of GMAT verbal, you're not choosing best of the worst. You will choose one answer choice that is precisely correct, and every other answer choice would be absolutely incorrect. That's what a good CR question is. Okay. And any expert who really says you have to choose best of the given answer choices has not studied the test. Okay. Now we're going to up the ante a bit more, and you can probably feel it because you're going to go faster. So what I'm going to really do is I'm going to give you the next question, and the next question is more difficult than this. It will require more focus, more applications. I want to make sure each one of you has a glass of water, but I also don't want to time you. So I want each one of you to select the answer choice not answered. So that way, when you select another answer choice, I know that you are done with this. So I want each one of you to select not answered. I have about 131 students in the webinar. I want to see at least 90 not answered chosen over here. So the beauty of this system is when 80 to 90% of the class has actually chosen another answer other than not answered, I will call time. So that way we are driven by the wisdom of this group rather than by how much time I believe you should take. So let's get at least 90% of the class to select not answered. So I only have 72 people who've selected an answer choice. I want to get At least 80. At least 80 folks to select an answer choice. All right, I have 84, 85. The more the merrier, because then, we actually have greater participation in deciding when do I call time. Okay, I'm going to now show you the first full length question. It's RDS Technologies. I'm going to mute myself. Good luck. Okay, guys, last 30 seconds, about 60% of the class is done. So I'm going to give you, this is the 30. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. And we're gonna now go to the next question, which is, Shelby will refuse. I want you to select not answered. And I'm gonna share the next question with you as well then. Select not answered, please. Again, you know the drill. And for those of you who will be attending this session tomorrow on algebra, this is what we're going to do for every question. We're going to have each one of you select not answered. We're going to have 90% of you get there. And then I'm going to time you guys as a group. So you guys will time yourself. Okay, let's get to a few more responses. On not answered, I have 83 responses so far. 84, 85, 86. 3, 2, 1. Okay. I'm going to remove broadcast results. I'm going to show you the next question. Here's your next question. Good luck, guys. Alright guys, about 90% of the class is done, so I'm gonna give you guys last 5 seconds. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Okay, so let's see how we did. We're going to discuss the RDS technology question, probably the most challenging question that you're going to really see. And what we see for this question is, and you can see the argument in the question over here right now, is that choices A and D were most popular. Choice B and C were also quite popular. So we're going to discuss each and every answer choice right now. Okay, so argument, I'd say semi-complex, not super complex overall. The conclusion fairly easy to identify. The last statement, statement number 4, is the conclusion, which says the number of landers receiving special program information did not increase significantly in between those time periods. And here's where I want you to make sure that you observe this. One of the two specific things about this statement, if you just read this statement over here in isolation without worrying about anything else over here, you're going to notice two things. One is that this conclusion, actually you're going to notice three things. One is about Verlanders, A. The second is it's about special programs. And the third is it's about what happened to those special programs during the years 94 to 96. Okay. Can you guys see this? So the conclusion talks about these three things. It's about Verlander, it's about special programs, it's about what happened during this time period. And what happened is we're talking about probably did not increase a whole lot. Now, when you have a conclusion which has so many specific terms, one thing which is there is if you understand those terms, weeding out the correct answer or narrowing down to the correct answer becomes a lot easier, because if an answer choice does not talk about special programs, it can't be the assumption. Why? Because assumption and conclusion need to be related. If an answer choice does not have an impact during that time frame, which is 1994 to 1996, then it can't be the correct answer. Does that make sense? If you understand the assumption, the conclusion, you can really say that the assumption has to be about what the conclusion is. Okay, if the conclusion is about special programs, then the correct answer has to be about special programs. Because remember, what's the function of an assumption? To make sure that the conclusion isn't falsified or the conclusion doesn't break down. If the conclusion is about what happened during that time period, then the answer choice, the correct answer choice, has to be about this. And yes, people can come up with any number of assumptions. What I'm really trying to say is the correct assumption has to be about the conclusion. Because if it's not about the conclusion, then it can't, by definition, it can't stop the conclusion from failing. And that's where understanding that conclusion, as I said, one of the key things, is really important. All right, so what does the author say that? He says there are two things that happened between 94 and 96. The number of RDS equipped radios remain the same. These are the radios that people have in their houses, which is the radios used to receive special programs. They remain the same in 96 as they were in 94. And the number of transmitting stations increased a whole lot between 94 and 96. They went up from 250 to 600. Then the first statement, which is a really important contextual statement, it says radio stations with RDS technology broadcast special program information that only radios with an RDS feature can receive. So what does this tell you? It says, hey, if you want to get special programs, you need an RDS transmitting station and you need an RDS receiving station. Statement number 1 is really important. I want to make sure you understand that. Okay. If you want to get special programs, okay, you need two things. You need the radios with RDS feature and you need radio stations with RDS technology. Both of these is important. If you don't have one, you can't have special programs. Do you guys understand this? Simply English. I'm just translating the English into a set of necessary conditions. Okay, so let's draw the logical structure. What is the author saying? Between 94 and 96, very few additional well-landers received RDS programs. Why? Because two things happened between 94 and 96. The number of RDS radios remained unchanged. So these are the radios that people have. And the number of transmitting stations more than doubled. And context says to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios. Or to receive special programming, rather, you need RDS radios. Okay. So what's the falsification question? The falsification question is, under what conditions will there be a significant addition to the number of people receiving special programming or RDS programming? We are using that interchangeably. Given that between 94 and 96 there are very few additional radios, and between 94 and 96 we have a lot more transmitting stations. So tell me, what are the two possible scenarios in which we can falsify the conclusion? Let's get your answers. If new stations cover a larger area, absolutely correct, which means if new stations reach people who had the right kind of radio but were not covered, okay, that's really good. What else? There's one other way. If there are more people per radio receiving, who said that? Shreya Arora, really, really good response. There are two scenarios in which we can break this conclusion. The first one is, if the additional stations now cover areas which were not covered earlier, but where people did have the right kind of radio, or if we start putting these radios in Starbucks, so if there are far more people listening to every radio, then the number of Verlanders receiving special program information will go up tremendously. Can everyone see that under these two scenarios, the conclusion will break down? So what are your assumptions? The assumption is that the new stations did not increase coverage for the right kind of people, or the people per radio remained about the same. Either one of them is a valid assumption, and only one will be in your answer choices. NCA says, but how do we know that the extended area is covering Verlander and not some other? In the context, we're talking about Verland only. Where are the radio stations added? In Verland NCA. Right? The 252 to 600, we're talking about new stations do not increase coverage. The new stations are added in Verland. Let's look at answer choices now. Okay. Here are your responses. I'm going to actually show in the poll question once again. This is how you chose. Choice A was popular, choice D was popular, and B, C was somewhat popular as well. E wasn't popular. So let's kind of look at that. Choice A for alpha, is your correct answer. And let's see what this choice is saying and which of our pre-thinking assumptions is it talking about. It says, few if any of RDS radio stations that began broadcasting in Verland after 1994 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by RDS station. Very complex choice and really poorly worded, or I'd say sophisticatedly worded, if I were to really say. I'd say poorly because in terms of good written English, this is bad practice, but it's precise. So let's kind of translate this or transcode this into a simpler language. Few if any means almost none of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. What are the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94? They are the new radio stations. Okay. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by RDS stations. Almost none of the new radio stations increase the coverage of RDS programming. Do you understand the transcoding? Okay. Now, yes, bullseye. Look at it segment by segment. I'm going to repeat it once again. Few if any means almost none of the RDS radio station that began broadcasting after 94 are the new radio stations. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios. Those are the right kind of radios who are living in areas not previously reached. So broadcast to people with RDS radios but living in areas not previously reached means increasing the coverage of RDS programming. Okay, this is what this answer choice is saying. So if this is true, almost none of the answer choices, and we have to really say, remember our assumption was that the new radio stations don't increase the coverage, and this is what this answer choice is saying. So if we did the pre-thinking right, we'd really just choose it and not even worry about this. Okay. The negated statement is at least some radio stations increase coverage. If this is not true, then the negation part is that at least some, the negation of almost none, and again when you see the negated article you're going to really see this, the negation of almost none is at least some radio stations increase coverage. If at least some radio stations increase coverage, then can we really say that the number of landers receiving special program information did not increase significantly in 1996? No, we can't say that, and my conclusion breaks apart. Now some of you are worried about other answer choices. We're going to look at those other answer choices. Okay, don't worry about that. First, worry about this answer choice. This answer choice is saying that the new radio stations don't increase coverage, and it's a correct answer. Why? Because if the new radio stations increase coverage or increase coverage somewhat, then you have people who had the radio before but could not receive special program information but are now able to do that, which breaks our conclusion. Which is why this is the correct answer. Let's look at the next answer choice, which is choice B. In 1996, most Worldlanders who live within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. What's the definition of an assumption? What is the definition of an assumption? Can you write it down? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Right? An unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Now keep that definition in your mind and now tell me this. Is it required that most Worldlanders who lived within the listening area in 96 had a radio equipped to receive RDS? Or in other words, and listen to this carefully, or in other words, will my conclusion break down if only 30%, remember most means more than 50, 30% of Worldlanders if only 30% of Worldlanders had an RDS radio in 96, will my conclusion break down? No, it won't. So this word most is not important, is not required. Okay. Remember, the conclusion is about the change in number of listeners from 94 to 96. If 30% were there in 94, 30% should remain in 96. It is not required that essentially everyone or most people should have the right kind of radio for this conclusion to hold true. Let me kind of draw a parallel argument for that. Do you only negate most? Okay. Yeah, for negation you only negate most, yes. And again, when you see the negation article, you will see many examples over there. But yes. Or you say most Worldlanders, so the negation of most also turns out to be most, but again, as you see the negation article, you'll see enough examples for this to be very clear. Now, choice C was popular too. Choice C says And Neha, yes, you're absolutely right. It's not about how many, what percentage, but the fact that it did not change between these two times. Choice C says, equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area. Now, what is the conclusion about what kind of programming? What kind of programming is my conclusion about? Can you guys tell me? It's about special programming, right? Now, do I need RDS technology in a transmitting station to get special programming as per the argument? Okay. Then what happens to the range? Does it matter? I mean, let's say equipping a radio station with RDS technology does indeed decrease its listening area. Which programming does it impact? Does it impact special programming or non-special programming? Which programming? No, it doesn't impact both. What is the range if I have or let me just ask this question in other words. What is my range of special programming from a radio station if it doesn't have RDS technology? Okay, let me ask this question again. It's 0, as you guys said. If it's 0, right? If it can't send special programming, then it's 0. If a radio station does not have RDS technology, it can't transmit special programming, which means its range is 0 by definition. Do you guys get it? Or in other words, if it's given to you, if it's given to you, and then if I tell you, that John doesn't have a job, by definition you can infer, and remember, you see how the application of inference skills comes over here. If John does not have a job, then John, by inference, John does not earn money. Okay. So if equipping a radio station with RDS technology impacts any programming, it's not special programming. It's actually non-special programming that this choice indirectly is talking about. And we don't care about non-special programming or other programming. Why? Because the conclusion only cares about special programming. Do you guys get it? Let's see, what is the question? AK, I think you're right in your inference, yes. Let's look at choice D. Choice D is a very tricky choice, and I want you to focus your attention over here. Read it very slowly. In the year 1996, were landers who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS? First of all, the first red flag over here. Do we care about people who don't own radios to receive RDS? Do we care about those folks? We don't. So you should have rejected it over here. Could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming? No, we don't. Because we don't care about people who don't have RDS radios, we don't care about any programming, this answer choice is incorrect. The most popular answer choice you could have rejected very easily had you worried about the conclusion. Choice E, type of programming, doesn't matter. Okay. So over here, I think the key takeaway that you need to have is, if you pre-think, this is a very complex question, probably the most difficult question that you're going to really see on the test, and then you'd see it only if you're at 95th percentile in critical reasoning. But the takeaway that I want you to have from all of this is that if you focus, if you pre-think, if you ask the right question, I mean, you guys got the falsification scenarios like this, those who understood the argument. So if you focus on understanding the argument, drawing that logical structure, you would be able to come up with falsification scenarios. Once you have those falsification scenarios, you know what to look for. And that's when you get the right answer. And 25% of you did get the right answer on the most challenging question that you're going to see in assumption. That's really good. It's the first day of critical reasoning, remember? All right, let's see what's going on over here. Last year, we collected a bunch of refuse. We did not send anything for recycling. We actually burned everything. Okay, everything was sent for incineration. Now let's assume one trash can is equivalent to one truckload of garbage. How many truckloads did we send for incineration last year? How many truckloads did we send for incineration? Right? All of them. There are 10 trash cans over here. So if you count the number of trash cans, there are 10. So all 10, 100% were sent for incineration. Now this year, if we collect the same amount of garbage, how many truckloads are we going to send for incineration? If we collect the same amount of garbage, it's about 5. Right? 5 truckloads would be sent for incineration. Now, here is the kicker. I want to make sure I understand, I see how well you've understood. If the amount of garbage we collect this year is 10 times as much, in that case, how many truckloads do you think we'll send for incineration this year? If the amount of garbage that we collect is 10 times as much, then how many truckloads are we talking about? If we collect 10 times as much garbage or refuse, one and the same thing this year, how many truckloads would we send for incineration? 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. 55% of you think it's 50. 16% of you think it's 100. Both these groups would be wrong. 21.6% of you think it's 5, and you guys would be absolutely correct. And to see why it's 5 despite collecting 10 times the garbage, let's read the argument once again. This year, city services will, yes, separate for recycling enough refuse to be incinerated to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So what this is saying, as some of you are really finding it, pointing it out, is what the author is telling you is that regardless of the amount of refuse that we collect, we're only going to send half as many truckloads for incineration this year as was the number last year, even if we collect 100 times as much refuse. That's something that's already happening. That's something that you should have inferred from reading the argument itself. Can you guys see this? So if we are only going to send half as many truckloads for incineration, then what's the only condition that needs to be true? If I'm only going to send half as many truckloads, what's the only must be true condition? That the amount of ash created per truckload is not the same. So let's look at the logical structure. The conclusion is that the ash generated this year will be half of last year's number. How? We'll only send half as many truckloads for incineration and we'll recycle the remaining. So what's the falsification question? Under what conditions will the ash generated be greater than 50% even if you only send half as many truckloads for incineration? The only possible scenario is if the average ash generated per truckload is higher than what was generated per truckload last year. So my assumption really is that ash per truckload either remains similar or is lower than what it was last year. Okay, which is choice D. And 52% of you got to this. 52% of you got the correct answer, which is really, really good. Choice is A. This is one of the few official questions in which you have an answer choice which gives the same information that is given in the argument. Choice A says this year no materials at city services used for that city services separate for recycling will be incinerated. Yes, it's a must be true condition, but you can already infer that, so it does not provide any new information. You can infer from the argument that whatever is separate for recycling will not be sent for incineration. Choice B talks about the costs. We don't care about the costs. We're not concerned about this thing. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable versus non-recyclable and compares it to last year. We don't know what was the proportion last year, and again we don't care. Why? Because I'm only gonna get half as many truckloads for incineration. Choice D, it talks about the ash per truckload, which is in line with our pre-thinking. You can really use a negation test as well if you're confused. The negation part would be we are going to negate the no more aspect, which is this part over here, and the negation of no more is more, which means refuse incinerated this year will generate more ash per truckload than did last year. The impact on conclusion, well, it will break the conclusion down. Choice E talks about the total quantity of refuse. Do we care about it? No, we already saw that even if we collect 10 times as much refuse, we will still, I'm sorry, why am I animated? If we collect 10 times as much refuse, we'll only be sending half as many truckloads. What's a negated statement? Total quantity of the refuse will be greater. Does it matter? Absolutely not. Why? We'll still get half as many truckloads. So again, if you do the pre-thinking right, if you understand the logic of the argument, getting to the assumption, this was a 700 level question too, becomes very easy. Now let's see, how do you become a CR champ from now on? Okay, one thing that I want to make sure you understand is if you follow the process clearly, pre-thinking becomes very easy. It becomes a piece of cake. If you understand the argument, if you understand the conclusion overall, pre-thinking becomes extremely simple. Okay, and as you pre-think, as you saw, a lot of people already went to group 3 or level 3 of pre-thinking, you can not only improve your accuracy, but you can also save time. So what are some of the next steps? Make sure you go through the files. What you see with these files is, in the first part, it gives an introduction to assumption. A lot of this we've already done, but this gives you in a lot more detail. Then we go towards a logical gap. That's one argument structure. Then we go towards arguments that compare two entities. It's the same process, but it's different argument structure. So what we are doing as you go from 2.1 to 2.2 to 2.3 is we are expanding your horizons when you to think about arguments. Okay. This is something which is there in the free trial. Then you practice these questions overall. That's what I want you to do. This is if you are not a paid user. Okay. If you are a paid user, make sure you go through the foundation concepts. Then you go through each of these modules in a certain order. You already saw how working on inference allows you to extract information from the argument, and that helps you in assumption questions. It also helps you further on in evaluate, strengthen, and weaken questions. Okay. In each of these core modules, you're going to see the concept files, you're going to see the corresponding quizzes, you're going to see the application files and practice quizzes as well. And at each point, you will get feedback. Okay. Overall, as you go through the e-GMAT course in Scholaranium, you would actually now see more than 600 full-length questions with the updated Scholaranium Platinum. So this is an architecture that's designed to ensure learning. When we talked about that private tutoring-based approach, this integrated learning with concepts, application, and qualifying exercises is the foundation of this. This is how a private tutor actually works. And to see that embodiment, let's kind of see how a paid student goes all of this. Some of you are asking, is this something that you do in your paid part as well? Absolutely. This in our paid part, we do much more. What you see over here is we start with that introduction to assumption, we do the logical gap, we see all kinds, assumption applied to all kinds of argument structures. So the beauty of this is when you go through logical two entities, segments, comparison, and quant kind of arguments, you will have understood how to read, how to comprehend all kinds of arguments with all kinds of conclusions. I mean, these are real videos in which you have assessments built in there. Okay. Starting 3.3, you already will start seeing application being done in files. The files automatically advance overall. Then you have two application files. Then you have two practice files. Okay, and then we have the relevant official guide questions overall. So when you think about it, learning the concept, level 1 of application, level 2 of application, overall practice. And then official guide questions if you want to do them. When people follow this, this is how you get 100+ point improvements. You solve every question using this approach. Master pre-thinking. Don't worry about timing early on, as I said. You become a level 3 pre-thinker as you start to follow this approach, and then you won't even have to worry about timing. Do the OG questions. Even if you've done them, solve them using this approach. The confidence that you would get would be tremendous. And make sure that you review our solutions. Just to tell you how comprehensive this is, the e-GMAT CR offering actually now has, as I said, upwards of 600 questions with the launch of Scholaranium Platinum and our own mocks, which is more than 10 times the CR questions you're going to see in Manhattan CR, or but actually upwards of 7 times the CR questions that you're going to really see in PowerScore. I mean, it's needless to say that you don't need any other resource to go through this. Again, the beauty of this is that because this is architected in such a modular fashion, if you're already at a certain level, you can isolate your weakness and focus just on those modules. And again, go back to Scholaranium, practice again, and make sure that you've actually improved. And here's an example of a student who improved from a V32 to a V46. V46 is 99th percentile on verbal. Okay. What helped her improve to V46? A methodical approach. B, the fact that she revised her mistakes. And she focused on studying one section till she achieved that level of perfection. Now, the beauty of this is because she had that focused approach, she was able to go from a V32 to V46 in just about 20 days. She was admitted to ISB within 10 days of applying. And then if you think about career transformations, actually, if you look her up right now on LinkedIn, what you'd really realize is that she went from someone who's a reporter for Reuters to now she's now working as the head of branding for one of the top firms in the country. A career transformation in 1 year. And that improvement in CR doesn't need a year. It can happen in 5 to 10 days. Okay, guys, with that, we've come to the end of the second part of this webinar. It was a pleasure conducting this. I mean, you guys were really good with your participation. I really enjoyed the answers that you put in overall. And you guys are super enthusiastic throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions that I have not been able to answer, please post those questions in the Q&A pod. And again, if you can, on the right hand side, you see this short answer pod in which you've been putting your answers. If you can put your comments on the webinar, that would be there. So Karan says, if you enroll for the e-GMAT course, does it require attending this webinar? If you're enrolled for the online courses, it doesn't require attending this webinar. And I appreciate the feedback, guys. That'd be really nice if a few more can provide the feedback. If you're a paid member, are there these instructions as well? Yes, way more in way more detail. Can you join the verbal live classes only? We stopped offering just the verbal live part. We've enhanced our GMAT live prep offering tremendously. So a verbal live prep offering prior to this did not have our mock test. They did not have the official GMAT mock test. So what we decided was we found that 80% of the people were buying GMAT live. We found that 80% and those who were buying just verbal live weren't getting those Q50, Q51s. So we enhanced our GMAT live offering by adding about $400 worth of additional value with official GMAT marks, which are $100, with our e-GMAT created marks, which, by the way, are the only marks in the industry that provide ESR analysis. If you want to get an ESR, otherwise you have to spend $300. And then we added one-on-one sessions on top of that. I would really recommend, if you're interested in live, go for GMAT live. So Shubnam says, is this in any way a right approach? If you're not able to reach the right falsification scenario, you can scroll to the answer choices and look at it and get it. So Shubnam, here is the thing. When you think about symptoms and causes, you have to really attribute this and understand this really well. The reason you're not able to get to even a single falsification scenario is because you've not understood the argument. The symptom is you're not able to get to a falsification scenario. The cause is you've not understood the argument. If you haven't understood the argument and you look at the answer choices and you see the correct answer choice, because you haven't understood the argument, you won't be able to ascertain that that is the correct answer choice. So it will not help. Okay, what is the difference between paid and unpaid webinar? So we only offer 10 to 15% of our webinars as free. So for example, the evaluate session tomorrow is only for our paid students. The strength and weaken session next week is only for our paid students. The portfolio session on next Sunday is only for our paid students. We have an algebra session tomorrow that's free. But again, the purpose of the free session is to tell you how good these sessions are. If you like these sessions, our paid sessions are 3x as interactive as this one. They go faster than this one. So hopefully that helps answer Neha, the difference between paid and unpaid webinars. What's the cost of upgrading from GMAT Online to GMAT Live? I think it's $199. You can write to support@e-gmat.com overall, or rajat@e-gmat.com. And Francisco, that's you're welcome. Yes, our goal really with these upgrades is to make sure that we provide way more value. Even with GMAT Online, we spend upwards of 10,000 hours creating these mocks. If you go to our blogs, you're gonna really see how people have gone on from 700 to 740 in a week based on feedback from these mocks. So here is this thing. A verbal online essentially is no longer available at that price. Again, we've made upgrades to this as well. So again, the old courses we are not selling. You can still write to us at rajat@e-gmat.com. And if you made your promise, we can see what we can do. How do you get access to the next CR lectures? By joining the GMAT Live Prep badge. So if you want to know about our courses, you can, and if you want to do a comparison, our pricing and plans page is a really great page. You can just hover over various items. If you upgrade to GMAT Live from GMAT Online, you would get a score guarantee as long as after subscribing to GMAT Online, you've not taken a mock, the official test. Can you just buy Scholarinium? No, we don't offer Scholarinium as a standalone product. We don't offer mocks as a standalone product. And the reason for that is that our products are so integrated. When people go through Scholarinium, they need help with regards to improvement because Scholarinium helps them with two things. One, identify the areas of weakness, and B, confirm that they've actually improved. But then they also need, where do you improve from? Where do you learn this stuff? And that's where the core courses become very useful. And again, remember this, when you build a product, it's really, for us, it's very important to build something that is scalable. When we offered Scholarinium as a standalone product, 95% of our students still bought packaged products. So it was really a nuisance for us to offer Scholarinium as a standalone product, because when you offer it as a standalone product, we found that those 5% of students had way more queries about how to improve, and they didn't have our core courses to improve, and that's why they were having those queries. Ajib says, with e-GMAT live classes, 4 GMAT will also be provided, including e-GMAT mock tests. So 4 GMAT preps, which are there, which is GMAT mocks 3 to 6, are separate from the e-Sigma X mocks that we have just released. Okay, so overall with GMAT live prep, you currently get 16 mock tests as is written, which by the way are separate from GMAT Club. So I mean, in my opinion, you would not see any of you'd not need mock tests. And again, just to really see how powerful the Sigma X mocks are, and is you can just, these mocks are just released, and you can go see the reviews of these tests over here. Do we get an extension on the course if we go for an upgrade? Shrey, I think we have an option for that. So again, write to Rajat@e-GMAT and really say, this is what I'm looking. So I think we did offer some package deals before launch. I was again very focused on launch, so our sales team did offer that. So you can write to Rajat@e-GMAT, and someone from our sales or our customer success team will respond. A says, isn't GMAT all about momentum? So if you spend the time and master one section and go back to that section after a month or so, you won't accuracy reduce in the section mastered. It's a misnomer that a lot of people have. GMAT is about learning things the right way. Okay, it's not about momentum. It is, I mean, it is about momentum, yes, but if you learn things the right way, you'll find that you won't forget things. I mean, I get students who come to me 2 years post taking the course, and after in the middle of an MBA, they really say, "Hey, I still remember a lot of the stuff that I learned in sentence correction, and I'm using that and as I write stuff." Similarly, stuff in critical reasoning, as they express and write their reports, they're able to really see that. Okay, take a look at this success story. This guy improved from a 600 to a 720. This guy has gotten 2 full fellowships right now. Again, not the highest score, but what you would really see is how methodically has this guy gone. Or I'm going to give you another student who's looked at a data-driven approach. The beauty of this is all of you come with different problems, and the tools allow you to carve these solutions for yourself. Take a look at how this person improved using analytics to a 740, 750 score. And then for those of you who want to go, remember this, a journey to 720 is level 1, journey to 740, 750. So Utkarsh says, should I go to the evaluate module and join from there? Absolutely, Utkarsh, that's how you should do. And again, if you're worried about it, just try it once again. You'd get a feedback that the session hasn't started, but that would mean that you're on the right link. And again, if you have questions, write to the support team. For GMAT online subscribers within 25 days, do we help them with how should you proceed? Absolutely. We help everyone with their study plans, yes. Okay, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. Okay, do Sigma X marks come free with GMAT Online? They do, yes. Again, if you see the plans and pricing page, you'll see that over there. So Sigma X marks come free with GMAT Online. So by the way, you get 1 mock test as a part of the free trial. Has anyone tried a Sigma X mock as of yet? Let's see. Anyone who's over here, about 46 students still in the webinar. Has anyone tried a mock test? The Sigma X mocks? Okay. Try it out. Okay. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. It was a real pleasure, and I just make sure you go through the foundation lessons, you go through the prerequisites. Also, remember, we have the algebra webinar tomorrow. So do make sure that you attend that. We have the algebra webinar tomorrow. We have the free GMAT strategy webinar next week. Make sure you register for the same and attend the same. All right. Thank you very much. I'll see you